Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Learning from the Pros. Joining me today is Lee Gannon, the Senior Digital Marketing Manager at Cognism, sharing his top 10 tips for competitor research using ad libraries. Welcome, Lee.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here, Sylvia.
I'm super pumped to dive in. We are connecting for the first time. I feel like it's the start of a beautiful relationship. And I want to just kick off this video with just giving people some quick background on yourself, where you're from, and your experience in paid ads.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been working in paid ads for about seven and a half years now. So it's actually my first week in a new job. So I've just joined the team at Cognism. So sales intelligence platform, working in the B2B SaaS space. Super excited to be kind of at the start of a new journey there. Previously, I've been agency side for a while, so I've just done kind of stints at two different agencies in paid media roles. So I was paid media lead at a B2B tech agency in London. Prior to that, I was head of paid social at a kind of independent agency in the UK. And then I started my career in-house, employee number one, tiny startup, sort of self-taught paid media, loved it, and then kind of went on that journey ever since. So been living and breathing paid media for sort of seven pushing 8 years now.
Nice. It's the dopamine hit, You get to run something, you get immediate feedback, and then you can.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
SEO is a bit too slow for my liking, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Me too. I tried it. Like now with ad conversion. Side note, we SEO is such a core part of our content strategy. So it's been such an adjustment. Learning more about that domain and kind of getting it to work. But anywho, let's dive in with tip number one.
Yeah, so for this, I wanted to, I'm really interested in competitor research. So as I said, working agency side, I think it's something that we always advise clients to do. And there are so many tools out there. There are so many kind of different ways you can approach this, whether it's kind of desk research, spying on competitor pages, using dedicated tools. My first tip is very simply just bringing attention to the fact that there are these fantastic ad libraries. So whether it's the more recently launched LinkedIn ads library, which I think came out last year, potentially the year before, the Google kind of ads transparency center, which for all intents and purposes is an ad library, and then the older kind of OG Meta ad library, Facebook ads library. So it's just reminding people that these are fantastic tools, and I think checking them out maybe quarterly is probably appropriate for most advertisers, just to kind of have a little bit of a spy on the competition. And then I think for the rest of this conversation, I'd love to kind of paint a little bit of a picture in terms of giving some guidance on how to use these tools specifically.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, first and foremost, just bookmark those tools for sure.
We'll have them linked in the show notes down below for everyone. So if you're listening, so you can check out the Google App Transparency Center. That's a really cool one because you can see search ads, you can see YouTube ads, you can see display ads. So it shows you all the different mediums, which is really nice. And I don't think a lot of people really know about that one, or it doesn't come up as often. And then you also have the LinkedIn ad library, like you mentioned. Then you've got the Meta ads library. Most platforms have an ad library. TikTok has one, but we'll see how long TikTok's around in the US. After what happened, but yeah, definitely check those out. We'll link them in the description.
Absolutely. So, I mean, jumping in, I guess, to kind of tip number two. So, I think when you're using these tools, I think what I love to do is to use the filters to play around with sort of time, so recency of the ads, but also country as well. So I think it's a really simple point, but I think one that's overlooked. But by looking at some of your key competitors on these ad libraries, and kind of toggling with the different regions, it actually just gives you an amazing sense of which markets your competitors are playing in. So you might find that, when you're searching the libraries for, say, the United States, you're finding hundreds of ads. Maybe you're flipping to kind of the UK, other markets in EMEA, just lower volumes of ads. So straight away, that's a bit of market intelligence that's completely free that, can inform your own advertising in terms of which countries are you focused on, and then which countries are your competitors focused on. And I think just being quite lazy, I think volume of ads live is a bit of a proxy for how much they might be investing in those markets. Obviously, the tools aren't going to tell us their exact ad spend, but I think it's interesting. And then when I'm looking at the different countries, ads for specific countries, the first thing you'll notice as well is, are those ads being localized? So, are competitors taking the kind of investment and the time and the effort that goes into localizing ads for different regions, or are they running kind of the English ads across different markets? And again, that might give you kind of food for thought for what you could be doing with your own advertising as well.
I love this tip. Just to unpack that, running it back a bit here. So you're saying, leveraging these libraries to get that market intelligence on your competitors and where they're advertising, you can leverage these filters around region, and then you can see what regions do they have more ads on, less ads, with the asterisk here of like, more isn't necessarily better versus less, but it can give you a sense of, hey, they're actually active in this region. There might be something to it. And then especially taking it a step further with what you mentioned, Lee, of if their ads are localized, then that means they're putting some serious thought and consideration in activating in those different regions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, localization is a big investment, right? So it's good to get a bit of, a sense that it's working for someone else before we pour our own investment into that type of activity.
Totally. Tip number 3.
Yeah, so I've already kind of touched on this idea of sort of just volume of ads live being a bit of a proxy for their level of investment on a channel. So I think, we've touched on just regions, but if we just look at it as actually different channels, so we've spoken about Google, LinkedIn, Meta. So just looking at which channels they seem to be the most active on. Again, there are other competitor research tools out there, paid tools that will kind of give you a sense of the different traffic sources. But we're talking today about the free ones, right? Which is the most kind of accessible to kind of all marketers and all advertisers. So you mentioned, which I think is a good call out, just the kind of the Google transparency census. And one of the best things about that, as you said, is the fact that it will show you search ads, display ads, video ads, etc. So I think, making a note of, is X competitor running display ads as well as search, or, are they investing in video content? And just kind of mapping that out, and maybe just tracking that kind of quarterly, as we've said. Kind of before the call, I spoke briefly with you about kind of competitor research being great for kind of FOMO. So if you're dying as an advertiser to be testing YouTube ads, but you haven't been able to get kind of sign off on a test budget, the easiest way to get sign off, in my experience, is by kind of showing your budget holder, your line manager, competitors that are maybe already running YouTube ads, and then they kind of feel like they're left out, and suddenly you have a bit of test budget coming your way. So I think that can be quite nice for creativity, for sure.
Strategic FOMO.
Yes, strategic FOMO, for sure.
Yeah, you're going to your manager, boss, whoever, and you're saying, hey, we should be on YouTube. Look at all these ads that so-and-so company is activating here. There might be some, rhyme and reason to the madness, essentially.
Definitely.
Sweet. All right. Tip 4.
Yeah, tip 4. So kind of an old school one, to be honest with you. So, advertisers have been talking about this idea of having a swipe folder for some time, but I actually think, not all of us kind of drink the Kool-Aid and actually have one. So if you're kind of not familiar with this idea, so a swipe folder is literally just creating a folder on your desktop, your cloud interface, whatever, of just screenshots of ads that you like, as you're kind of browsing and going about your business online. So it might be direct competitors. It could be completely irrelevant brands where you just admire them in kind of maybe adjacent markets. So I think creating a swipe folder is such a basic one, but something that we should all be doing. But I think what's really important is, not only just using it for your own inspiration, but actually sharing that swipe folder with teams. So if you have a creative team, if you have a copywriter in your team, making it a collaborative folder, so they're using it for ideas as well. And I think that's a really easy way of freshening up your own campaigns, getting some ideas, because I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel every time. If we see the same ad from a competitor over and over and over again, the chances are it's probably working. And can we make a take on that ourselves?
Yeah, it just makes me think of the Pablo Picasso quote: "Good artists copy, great artists steal."
Yes,
you're
absolutely
consistently trying to steal inspiration and then transform it and make it your own, right? Not just plagiarize and rip someone off, but make it your own, make it better, take what works, build on it. Yeah, I totally agree. I'm curious for the people listening that might already be overthinking this step around building their swipe folder. How have you done it for yourself?
Yeah, so nothing fancy, literally I'll just have an inspiration folder, on the work laptop. If I'm working as part of a paid media team in a shared drive that we'd access.
Hmm.
If you're being very, very organized about it, you could start, compartmentalizing it with folders, different types of ad, like, social proof ads you see, direct response ads you see, maybe different competitors if you really want to get a bit creepy and like stalk them very regularly,
Hmm.
and start organizing them in terms of different brands. But obviously, the great thing about the ad libraries are that you don't have to wait for a competitor ad to appear in your feed, because if they're doing their job properly, they'll probably be excluding you anyway. You can
Yep.
actually proactively, sit down for an hour, fire up an ad library, do a deep dive, and just take those screenshots, and kind of mine your competitors for inspiration that way.
Yeah.
Not all the time, life's too short to be constantly looking over your shoulder at competitors, but every now and again, maybe as part of that kind of quarterly planning cycle.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like for me personally, if somebody ever hacked my phone, God forbid, and they went to my photos, all they would see is screenshots of ads.
Yeah.
Is like the majority, and food, that's it. And what I do that I find really helpful is I take screenshots of the ads on my phone, because that's typically when I'm browsing through social and I'll see ads. And what I do is I take a screenshot and then I just have Google Drive connected on my phone. I have the app. So
Nice.
through the Google Drive shortcut, I'll just upload the images from my phone to a swipe folder in my drive.
Love it.
And I have it pretty basic as well, in the sense of the folder, it's like the general folder. I upload just all the raw images, and I don't
Mhm.
worry about making it organized or pretty or anything. This is just like, I'm in the moment. I want to reduce the amount of effort it takes to store that inspiration. So I'll just upload it into that folder. And then later on, when I go and it's time to actually like do my due diligence, review my folder, then I move it into different subfolders depending on like the channel and then the type of angles as well. We
Nice.
actually have a library coming out soon on AdConversion.com, an ad and landing page library. It's the ad library right now is just over 1,000 examples of ads, and we have it classified by industry, offer, company. So it's pretty extensive. So people can
Nice.
use that as well, like as like a starting place to build their swipe folder.
Very cool. Yeah, you sound more organized than me on that, but yeah, I love it. I think another idea on this that's just kind of come to me actually is maybe setting up like a dedicated internal Slack channel for it, because the amount of times you'll be slacking colleagues just as and when, oh, saw this, it's cool. But rather than kind of cluttering those Teams channels, maybe just having like an evergreen swipe, an evergreen kind of swipe Slack channel would
Yeah,
be quite a cool thing to do internally
that's
as
a really
well.
cool idea too, for sure. Tip number
Nice.
5.
Yeah, so when we think of competitor research, often it's everyone has kind of one or two key competitors that they kind of losing sleep over. But I think competitor research doesn't have to be necessarily your top sort of 4 or 5 competitors. I think actually, if you're quite a mature player in your space, and maybe actually you're the best marketers, maybe you're doing the best ad campaigns, maybe you're not actually going to learn as much as you would, as much as you can from kind of looking at your immediate competition. So I think actually using these ad libraries to look at, as I kind of alluded to earlier, players in kind of adjacent spaces, or maybe entirely different spheres. So if you work in SaaS, go look at some e-commerce ads.
Mm.
If you're a enterprise company, go and look at the kind of scrappy startup, or vice versa. Just to get some inspiration that's out of the ordinary. I think a lot of the time, obviously, creativity is just kind of borrowing one idea from a different sphere and applying it to another.
Hmm.
So I think that can be interesting. I think a lot there's this trend in B2B, isn't there, where it's becoming a lot more B2C. Emojis are suddenly in copy. It's a lot more human than it has been, and I think proactively carrying out your competitor research with that in mind would be a fruitful exercise for sure.
Yeah, I love this tip. I totally agree. Most, especially in the B2B space, there's not a lot of brands that come to mind for me personally that really stand out from a creative perspective,
Yeah.
compared to the B2C space. It's like everything is direct sales. So if their creative isn't performing, they cannot scale. They feel that impact, right? And so they're kind of ahead of the game in that respect. Yeah,
Yep.
100%. Stealing that inspiration from different industries and trying to make it your own. One thing that I tend to find myself doing is when I see an ad that I really resonate with, I pause and I reflect on like, what's the concept behind the ad? Because once you can start to think of things from, I almost think of it as like the soul of the ad. So most people, when they think of an
Mm.
ad, it's like they think copy, media. When I think of an ad, I think first of the angle, the concept. That's like the soul of it. That then built on top of it is media or copy. So it's
Nice.
like when I see something that resonates with me, I'm like, what's the concept here? So for example, like before
Mm.
and after. Okay, that might be a concept here. Um, maybe the concept is like something around a meme or something like that, and like there's all these different variants of that. So once you can start to think of it in that respect, now you can really get strategic on like how you're pulling that genius, and then you can start to create different variations of tests off of the
Mm.
concept and the ad angle. And now you can get really creative where you're like, and then you can mix concepts where you're like, well,
Yeah.
what if we
Nice.
combined before and after with AI generated content, right? So now you're taking
Mm.
two concepts and you're morphing it together, and now you have this new thing that you're presenting to the market.
Love it. Yeah, and obviously when you're running those creative tests, then as long as you've got kind of a good label, naming convention with those labels, you can set up those like A/B tests really really nicely.
Totally, 100%. Tip number 6.
Yeah, so six, kind of short and sweet. We've kind of touched a little bit on kind of organization with the swipe folders, but I think if you are going to carry out kind of competitor research in quite a structured way, maybe once a quarter, as we said, then you're going to need to document it in some fashion. So building some sort of matrix, and I'd love to hear kind of, if you've got any experience on this front, but I think it can be a very basic, spreadsheet, or maybe something more visual, like a kind of Trello, Asana board, whatever your kind of tool of choice is. We've kind of mentioned Slack channel might be one, but maybe that's a little bit more a kind of shorter term. So yeah, I think starting off with just a basic spreadsheet that you update once a quarter, because it will give you that sense of how your competition's advertising has evolved over time. It's not perfect science because you're just taking a snapshot in one day. And like maybe a rogue tip as well. Like I've done this before where I've actually been applying for jobs in paid media, performance marketing, and just as a bit of a differentiator in the interview process, like do a competitor research spreadsheet as just a value add and just send it to them. Like I've landed interviews where I've just gone that, these are your top 3 competitors as I understand them. And I've jumped on the ad libraries for a couple of hours. I've built out a really basic spreadsheet and I've sent it off to the company with my CV. And I got an interview. I didn't get the job in the end, but we'll forget that part. So yeah, just get creative. I
Yeah.
think. Do you have any experience with kind of like documenting it, or is it a bit more of an ad hoc thing for you guys at AdConversion?
By the way, side note, like if somebody, it's so like the simple things like that are, it just makes such a world of a difference from interviewing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like as the interviewer, and you see that, like to me, if somebody applied and they did that for us, instantly they would like rise above the pile. So that's like an amazing tip for everyone listening. As far as documenting creative testing goes, in the beginning it was like super simple. Hey, here's the creatives we ran, and honestly, it doesn't need to be complicated. Like, so I'm gonna put the asterisk here for everyone listening. We just launched our creative agency, so like we've kind of like taken it to another level now. But what we do, but where we started, and which was plenty, was we would literally just write it down. We're like, this month, these were the top creative variations that worked. Through our naming conventions, we were to put the data into a pivot table and be able to see what are the top concepts, what are the top angles across variations to then report on it really easily. Now what we've built is we've built this thing called the creative testing matrix, where it's basically where we've mapped out all of the concepts of ads that we've come across. And then with, like, you can think of it as this matrix. So it's like on the dimensions, you have all the concepts. and I think we're up to like 27 concepts right now, and it's super difficult like labeling these concepts. This is going to be something we'll share in the future on adconversion.com. So if you guys are listening, if it's not ready yet, but like everything we do, it's all free. Merry Christmas. But we have all the concepts, and then on the columns is the different ad dimensions and ad types. So like, for example, you can almost think of it as like the scorecard, and you can like start to cross off. And we built this for our creative team. So when they're thinking about like creative variations, it's very easy to think like, oh, I've tested it all. When the reality is you haven't even like skimmed the surface, you know? Because like, just quick example, it's like, imagine you've got one concept as an interview, and it's like, okay, well, have we tried the interview concept with image ads, 1200 by 628, or square, 1200 by 1200, or carousel, 1080 by 1080, or if you're doing display, 300 by 250, or if you're running stories, 9 by 16, and you can start to like cross-reference this grid and see where are all the areas that you've actually tested this thing. And then you imagine across all the concepts that are available, it's like, there's so many freaking ideas for creative testing. So it's kind of like our way of like strategically never running out of ideas on a creative side.
Absolutely. And, you know, as you're saying, like, as soon as you start to think about different ad formats, then those variables just like,
it just
you know, connects the number of like options, you know, even a video, short video, you know, portrait, landscape, whatever. Like, yeah, it's mad. Like, I think if you actually stop to think about it, then you should never really run out of ideas. It's more just about having the bandwidth to execute, I think.
100%. Yeah. Tip number 7.
Yeah, so tip number 7. So when you are looking at your kind of competitor ads on the different libraries, I think it's just actually thinking about it a little bit more deeper and trying to infer what the strategy might be on a particular channel. So, you know, some of the questions you might ask yourself, you know, almost as like a checklist exercise, but, you know, are these ads running to gated or ungated content? You know, is there a mixture that actually tells you a hell of a lot about how they're approaching a channel, whether it's, you know, demand capture or demand creation channel, you know, top of funnel, bottom of funnel ads, like, you know, do I consider this like a social proof ad versus a kind of direct response ad? You know, even looking out for things like events. So, you know, are they promoting events, webinars, physical events? Suddenly that actually tells you a hell of a lot about their business, that they, you know, events are a key part of their marketing strategy. And it might be, if you look at 3 different competitors, you know, in the, you know, side by side in the same kind of 1 hour period, and you notice all 3, you know, competitors are promoting webinars, and you've never launched a webinar before, then suddenly that's a huge data point for your business. So I think that's really, really interesting. And I would do that comparison between them, and then also to you. So, you know, so often we see that obviously on LinkedIn, historically, everyone's just kind of run gated content, you know, the lead gen forms, but it's interesting when you start to find the, you know, the competition that maybe aren't doing that, and then like bucking the trend, and then what are they doing? Maybe they're creating that content that's a bit more consumable in feed. And I just think it's super interesting.
I love that tip. So it's like driving strategy from the ads in flight, you know?
Yeah.
So you're looking at the ads outside of just from an inspiration perspective, but from a strategic perspective, you're like, what offers are they running here? And that can help. Yeah, that's a great tip. So you can get more insight around the thought process behind the strategy.
Yeah, we did a big, in my last agency role, we did a really big piece of work, which is a paid media audit for a huge enterprise manufacturer. And one of the channels we looked at was LinkedIn ads, and from the audit, we found that 90% of their investment on LinkedIn had been running gated content, almost all of it to LinkedIn lead gen forms, which everyone has a bit of a Marmite relationship towards. But then we went and did a bit of competitor research on their main competitor, and we found that they don't run a single LinkedIn lead gen form. So it was just a completely different use of that one channel, which is like super interesting to then have that conversation with the client as to, you know, whether or not, you know, we should be diversifying a little bit more. And basically what we sort of said was that we need to kind of pull back rather than, you know, 90% lead gen. I'm not saying that we need to abandon it altogether, but maybe let's look towards more of a 50-50 approach for next year, next quarter, whatever. And you know, just really taking that inspiration though from the finding from the competitors that we looked at.
Yeah, totally. Love it. Tip number 8.
Yeah, so the last tip was more kind of deeper kind of strategy. This is a little bit more superficial, but just looking at the ad formats that are being used. So we mentioned it already, but Google, are they running display as well as search? If it's display, maybe it's responsive display ads, maybe it's kind of uploaded kind of static ads. Are they running video? But it's not just a yes, no. It's like, well, what kind of video? Is it short form? Is it long form? Is it user generated? Is it like high production brand video? And then like everything from like the aspect ratios. So many people are still running like horizontal social ads, and obviously most people are trying to migrate to kind of the square, kind of more portrait type content. So anything like that you can find might be a kind of a seed of inspiration for your creative team. So again, it might be that I've worked with clients that never ever invest in video, and then we go and look at the competition, and then they're running almost entirely video ads. And then when we actually share examples of some of that video content, suddenly they feel like they should be doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a nice place to
Going back to that strategic FOMO.
Yeah, I love FOMO, absolutely.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Like hearing you say this, it's someone, if you're listening to this, you're like, well, that's obvious, but like ask yourself, when's the last time you actually did it?
Yeah.
It's the obvious, simple things that are usually the things that make the greatest difference.
Yeah, and absolutely, it is simple. Like I'm not saying otherwise, but like to the point where you could set an intern with this task, and it would be a fantastic use of their time. Getting them to look at the video ads of your competitors, and just they might know nothing about marketing, but they can make observations in terms of are they running short, long term video, shorter or longer video? What kind of video is it? Is someone speaking to a camera? Is it animated? Like they can do all this desk research for you. They don't need to be like a veteran in the space, but it's going to be a super useful use of time, I think.
Yeah, totally. Tip number 9.
Yeah, so up until now, I think in this conversation we've been focused mainly on the kind of ads themselves and the campaigns themselves. So I think the great thing about the ad libraries and competitor research is that it's not just about the ad. So all of these ad libraries, for those of you that might not realize, you can actually click through the ad and visit the competitor's landing page, which is insane because suddenly these aren't ad libraries, they're actually landing page libraries, and I can actually look at the hidden landing pages that my competitors have built for these campaigns that I'm probably not going to be finding otherwise because they're probably not the homepage on their website.
Mm-hmm.
So this, suddenly you've got a lot more homework because now you're not just stopping at looking at the ad and kind of making notes and screen grabbing that. Suddenly you could be doing entire deep dives on their landing page. How have they built that landing page? Like, what are the calls to action on it? How's it structured compared to yours? Do they have better social proof than you? All sorts of things. And then, suddenly your swipe folder could be taking entire page print screens of their landing pages and feeding that back to, your own website team and maybe running some tests for your pages as well.
I love this tip so much. Adding on to this for folks listening, if you want to build your library with screenshots of the landing page that you find, a Chrome extension that I love that I always use is called Go Full Page. And you just click it once and it just like scans the entire page and it takes a whole screenshot of the whole page, and it's super helpful.
Yeah, love that one. I'm looking at that right now on my Chrome toolbar.
Great minds think alike. All right, the final tip number 10.
Yeah, so I was trying to come up with something that's a little bit more like, maybe a little bit more advanced for number 10, and maybe this will tick the box, but along the same lines as the kind of the landing page point. So when you click through some of these ads and you fire up that landing page, what you'll notice is that actually their UTM parameters will stay intact. And I think this is true of all ad libraries, but you have to correct me if I'm wrong there. But this is where we can potentially become detectives, because you can start to maybe reverse engineer and kind of interpret the UTM string if you've kind of been around the block a little bit and maybe you've got some out yourself. So, some people use really kind of cryptic UTMs and you're not going to understand their kind of like abbreviations or anything like that. But but some of us use quite basic ones. So, maybe the UTM campaign is retargeting, website or something. And you can start to kind of infer, maybe it's a LinkedIn campaign and they've actually labeled it up as like member skills is the way that they're doing their targeting. So suddenly you've got kind of like nuggets of information in terms of maybe how they're setting up their actual campaigns and their targeting, as well as just the ad and the landing page. It
Hmm.
doesn't work all of the time, but like it's just an interesting data point, because if you know what the ad looks like, you've worked out that it's a retargeting campaign because it says so in the UTM, and you know what the landing page looks like. Now you have kind of a sense of what their retargeting strategy is, because it's like, well, they're running this kind of ad with this kind of messaging, and they're going to like book a demo page, and I know that's retargeting, and then maybe I go and find an ad that's more of a cold traffic ad,
Yep.
and then I look at the differences, and like it doesn't always work, but like I'm always kind of curious if I ever see a UTM that I can kind of work out a little bit.
You just gave me
So that's
like,
maybe a fun
you
game.
imagine like you set up your. I mean, I don't do this. I personally don't care. Like if they're spending the time to look through my URL structure, I applaud them. I'm like,
Yeah,
good for you guys. But you create a naming convention that's cryptic on purpose, so people can't, you know what I mean? Like go through your little breadcrumbs to find out what you're up to. It's like
yeah.
next level. But yeah, I
I,
totally
I
agree. If they have it, it's such a great data point, and then you can reverse engineer, like you said, what they're up to.
I think an example of me using this more recently is I've used it to kind of spot maybe where a campaign is an ABM campaign. Sometimes if you fire up an ad library, if they're personalizing their ads, you can actually just see from the imagery, like maybe they're calling out a specific company, and then you click through and then you hit on the landing page, and maybe they're using like a personalization tool, like a Mutiny or something. And that's really interesting, because suddenly like who a kind of strategic target of theirs is. And I've found this before, where I've actually found examples of someone doing like one-to-one ABM campaigns on LinkedIn targeting existing customers, and I could infer it was an existing customer because of the language on the landing page. And again, now you know who their customers are, or now you know who their kind of key target account is. So I think that's quite interesting, and sometimes you will find kind of ABM labeled up in those UTMs if it's not immediately obvious from the creative itself.
I love it. Guys, if you haven't gotten value, have you been listening? I want to go ahead and recap these top 10 tips for competitor research using the ad libraries. I feel like this was a masterclass for everyone listening. So first tip was to remember that they actually exist and they're at your disposal, and use them. Tip number 2 was to leverage the filters around specifically region and time, and really understand what regions are your competitors advertising in. Are they going through the effort of actually localizing those ads? If so, that's a pretty good signal to you that, hey, they are seeing some positive returns. Could be a region worth exploring for yourself. Tip number 3 was to leverage strategic FOMO. That's how I'm coining this tip, where if you want to get buy-in on certain ad types, like video was the example you used, and you see your competitors running a lot of video, you can show that to the powers that be that provide budget to you, and show them, hey, our competitors are primarily investing in this ad format. We should probably explore the same. Tip number 4 was to create that swipe folder to store inspiration. Tip number 5 is to not just limit yourself to your actual industry, but to move outside your industry and draw inspiration from all sources. Tip number 6 was to get in the habit of documenting your creative tests and your learnings. Doesn't need to be fancy. Google Docs is more than plenty, but just get in the habit of actually writing down the things that are happening from your tests so that you can build on your learnings over time. Tip number 7 was to derive your strategy from the ads in flight. So like, of the ads that your competitors are running, take a look and think through, and like, what's the strategy here? Are they running social proof? Are they promoting events? Are they doing capture? Kind of work backwards from there and kind of get a sense of the things that they're running and the offers that they're testing. Tip number 8 was to also really dive into the ad formats. So not just in addition to the offers, but the formats in which they're displaying those offers. Tip number 9 was to click through on the ads and actually scope through their landing pages and see the experience on site. And then finally, tip number 10 was to review the UTMs if available and reverse engineer their strategy and their campaign approach.
Summarized it much better than I could have. So yeah, thanks.
Lee, this was awesome. If people want to find you, where can they connect with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn. So just Lee Dash Gannon on LinkedIn, and yeah, we'd love to connect. So gonna try and put out a bit more content there. I think follow the lead of people like yourself. So yeah, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for listening to this lesson of Learning from the Pros. We'll see you in the next one.